The moment Seo-ah arrived on a strange continent, her freedom disappeared. Hidden in her possession was a mysterious key, one powerful enough to make dangerous men hunt her without mercy. And the person who wanted it most was Oscar Reinhard, a cold, calculating nobleman feared for his cruelty. Seo-ah knew she couldn't trust him. Oscar believed she was hiding the truth. Yet to survive the conspiracy closing around them, they were forced into a dangerous contract and an even more uncomfortable life beneath the same roof. But hatred becomes difficult to maintain when every argument pulls them closer. Because Oscar no longer looks at Seo-ah like a suspect. He looks at her like something he refuses to surrender. A long time ago, under the monochrome crash of a raging sea, Oscar von Reinhard remembers the mistake that brought everything to ruin. In his mind, he once allowed a worthless traitor to escape across the continent, and the shame of it still grips his chest like a heavy hand around his collar. That person brought downfall to his family and caused the loss of his father. A traitor. Now Oscar sits in cold dignity, black hair falling over blue eyes that have forgotten mercy, while the information tied to that person is presumed to be locked away somewhere he cannot yet reach. Inside a bright, elegant room, Oscar faces Bank President Felipe across a dining table and cuts straight to the secret. He asks about the vault Felipe has been watching, the one labeled safe number 5555, and whether the key has still not been found. Felipe tries to correct him, nervous moisture forming on his face, insisting the matter belongs to the Grand Duke of Baden, not him. Oscar ignores the excuse. His eyes lower, wisps of smoke curling at his fingers, and he asks one question that matters. When will he be able to open that safe? Most fateful events arrive without warning, and this one begins with a simple question inside a bank. Seo-ah, now grown into a slim young woman with ash-brown hair and anxious brown eyes, asks what safe her key belongs to and asks the clerk to repeat the number. Her fingers tighten around the little pouch as the answer lands. 5555. The only key that can open a safe untouched for 25 years is now in her hands. Somewhere else, Oscar stands in a loose white robe, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, and asks the name of that woman. Oscar assumes the person holding the key should be someone seated at the top of the world, someone powerful enough to control secrets that cross continents. Instead, the trail leads to this fragile woman lying beside him. In the blue-white quiet of his room, Seo-ah's face flushes with fear and embarrassment, a faint sheen shining along her cheeks as she struggles under his overwhelming closeness. Oscar tells her to relax, but the word does not soften him. His fingers press against her lips, and her eyes squeeze shut as her body stiffens. This is not romance yet. It is control dressed as curiosity. Seo-ah keeps resisting even as Oscar watches her with a low, unreadable smile. His hand stays firm against her mouth, and her fingers clutch at his robe while her cheeks flush deeper with panic. She is not strong enough to push him away, but she does not become still either. That persistence catches his attention more than fear would. The cold room glows with pale light, making both of them look almost unreal as Oscar studies her reactions like another locked mechanism. The question grows sharper in his mind. Has this woman become a living key? Now the strange future waits in silence. Seo-ah lies across the bed in a white dress, braid loose against the sheets, her body limp from shock, while Oscar sits beside her in his robe and studies her as if the answer to years of searching is breathing in front of him. Far away from that room, Seo-ah stands in modern clothes with a pink cardigan, hands folded and eyes lowered, asking when someone will come. Oscar, dressed again in formal gray, turns his head with a cold glance. The key has appeared, but the price of finding it has only begun. In Yangchan, the largest port village on the continent, clear blue waves crash beneath ships that bring strange people and foreign cultures to shore. Beyond the inner quarters, where only the tip of a mast can be seen, young Seo-ah peers out with wide brown eyes and a timid little body hidden in traditional clothes. Servants whisper that the youngest lady grows more mysterious with age, pale-faced and brown-haired like a ghost, so she must never step outside. When Seo-ah slips near the gate, the attendants bow in panic. A stern household madam cuts through them with one word: beware. Seo-ah trembles and calls for mother, but the only answer is a cold, warning stare. Inside the shadowed estate, Seo-ah already understands the meaning of whispered words and cold eyes, even while her small hands clutch at her clothes. Then her father appears in pale blue robes, gentle-eyed beneath his black hat. and asks why she keeps looking at the ground. When she stammers, "Father," he rests a warm hand on her head and leads her into the sunlight. From the hillside, the blue sea spreads beneath them, and Seo-ah can only gasp in wonder. Her father smiles and tells her she is his daughter. Even if she knows that may not be true, those words feel warmer than the sun. Then he says there is someone he wants to introduce, and a red-haired teacher enters her life. Thanks to her father and that kind teacher, Seo-ah's world begins to widen beyond the walls that once confined her. She stands between them beneath bright trees, her shoulders still shy, but her eyes slowly learning to lift. Then cruel time takes her father away. At the farewell ceremony, Seo-ah hides by a doorway with swollen eyes, watching adults pass as if she has become invisible again. Autumn light pours over the estate, and she sits alone until her teacher gently reaches for her shoulder. The teacher remains, becomes her friend, and helps her smile under lantern-lit streets. Seo-ah might have lived forever as the hidden youngest daughter of Han-hyum, Yangchen's lord, but without warning, that false peace shatters in a blaze. The lord's house falls to flames through the night, lantern lights swallowed by the roaring inferno as people cry out that the estate is lost. Someone begs the madam to get away while the household collapses into smoke, and Seo-ah's face drains as her teacher lies wounded in her arms. The teacher wonders if this is the price she pays for joining a conspiracy and overturning lives, but Seo-ah can only cling to her, shaking. She says she is going to cross the sea and search for the stranger who caused this. Her teacher warns that the journey is far, unfamiliar, and dangerous, yet Seo-ah's tearful eyes harden. Then the teacher tells her to listen well. That man is not the only one involved, and both men are searching for a key. In the dark aftermath of the disaster, Seo-ah holds the small pouch with trembling fingers as her teacher reveals the truth. The key is already in Seo-ah's hands. Seo-ah thinks she can simply give it to the man chasing the other one, but her teacher stops her. Any man who wants that key will point his blade at her. If Seo-ah wants to survive, she must prove clearly that she is the owner of the key. Only then will neither pursuer be able to chase her easily. Seo-ah's eyes fill with panic as dark shadows spread around them, and she begs her teacher not to speak anymore. But the teacher forces out one last warning: the wolf is coming. The warning fades into silence as the teacher's hand slips limp, and Seo-ah shakes her, begging her to wake up while the burning estate blurs behind her tears. Far from that memory, the wolf finally appears. Oscar Reinhard stands in a dark, desolate place, black hair falling over cold blue eyes as he looks down at a defeated foe. He asks whether the man thought this would happen, and if he would have still come had he known the ending. The answer is a cry of despair. Oscar's men act without hesitation, and Simon, his blonde aide, reports that 2 enemies are captured alive while the rest have fallen and will not rise. Oscar listens to Simon's report with a flat stare and orders the fallen to be buried, then makes sure the captain who accepted the job will face the consequences. When Simon asks what to do with the captured men, Oscar gives a single answer: that he has a promise to keep, and his voice makes it clear mercy is not part of it. Soon his carriage moves through dark woods and into Luxon, a city he finds shabby and sickening. The king's misconduct hangs over everything like a heavy fog. When the carriage reaches Amoureux's mansion, Oscar steps out under pale daylight, eyes narrowing at the single suspicious window. Something is being hidden inside. Inside Amoureux's mansion, bank president Felipe lounges in a private room surrounded by reveling guests, his robe loose and his face flushed with lazy arrogance. He complains that the noise outside is irritating and orders someone to call for even more company, completely unaware of the danger at his door. In the hallway, Oscar arrives with his men and commands the door to be opened. A servant nervously tells Your Grace to calm down, and another suggests returning later, but Oscar's patience is already gone. The door swings open anyway. Felipe looks up, confused that it is already open, and the room freezes as every guest realizes the wrong man has seen everything. The room turns cold the moment Oscar steps inside, his black suit sharp against the scandal and panic around him. Felipe stammers at Marquis Reinhard, unable to understand why he is there, but Oscar only tells him he will wait until they are finished. The insult lands harder than a shout. Felipe curses, orders everyone out, and tries to gather what pride he has left. Oscar von Reinhard is the owner of the Northern Continent's largest steel company and the Wolf of Luxon, a man even the imperial king hesitates to handle. 3 years ago, he rose with royal backing, but not for free. Now information ties Felipe's bank to a dangerous past operation, and Oscar's eyes sharpen. Interesting news never makes him bite easily. Felipe tries to act confused, but Oscar calmly apologizes for arriving late, saying uninvited guests blocked his path. Then he turns the metaphorical knife with a quieter question. It seems Felipe's assistant has brought him interesting news. Felipe sweats, wondering how Oscar could have arrived so quickly after only hearing about that safe. Oscar says all he heard is enough. No bank president should be faster than him. He asks about the safe Felipe has watched for years and pretends to forget the number, teasing, "Number 6000? Felipe denies it, but Oscar corrects him, "Number 5555. 2 hours earlier, Seo-ah stands in the bank clutching her pouch and asks what safe her key belongs to. The clerk repeats the number, and Seo-ah whispers it back. 5555, the only key to a safe unopened for 25 years. Inside Felipe Bank, Seo-ah's small brass key is lifted under a magnifying glass while clerks study every mark with tense precision. The key's serial number is read piece by piece, and a clerk murmurs that the documents and serial numbers match. Seo-ah sits stiffly in her dark cloak, brown eyes wide and hands tight in her lap, while the staff rush through the next verification step. One clerk asks whether the identification has been checked, but another admits these letters are unlike anything they have seen before. A foreign woman with an ancient key has just walked into the most guarded kind of secret. The bank staff wonder whether the key might be a perfect replica, but they also admit such a thing would take authentication until the next day. Their worry does not last. The result comes back with a force that makes the clerks flinch. The key is genuine. Seo-ah exhales, shoulders loosening only for a second, while the people outside the room whisper that she is clearly a foreigner no matter how she looks. Her face lowers beneath the weight of their stares, and she thinks she should have covered herself after all. The cloak is too hot, but standing out may be worse. The clerk returns the key with both hands and apologizes for the inadequate earlier response. Seo-ah accepts it quietly, blinking through confusion and answering that she understands. Then the question changes. The clerk says Seo-ah is not the original owner of the safe, and Seo-ah confirms it. In principle, only the original owner may open it, but this particular safe has not been accessed by its owner in more than 20 years. So access may be granted to the person holding the key. Seo-ah leans forward, hope flickering across her face, and asks if she may open it now. The answer is no, not yet. The bank still needs to translate her identification records and confirm the country that issued them, and Seo-ah stiffens when the clerk asks whether Dang-suk is correct. The name hits too close to home. She thinks of records, old language, and the sea she crossed, her lips parting as fear and resolve collide. Somewhere outside the room, movement gathers behind closed doors, and Seo-ah realizes this process will not stay quiet for long. If the information spreads, the men chasing the key may find her before she understands what the safe even means. The bank staff keep asking where the owner of the key has gone, and Seo-ah's path begins to narrow. Men in suits appear in the bank's bright halls, while the clerk's face tightens with alarm. Seo-ah, still wrapped in her dark cloak, walks away under a cold night sky, gripping the pouch like it is the only thing keeping her alive. She tells herself she does not have much time. If Dang-suk is connected to the records and the safe, she cannot simply wait in Luxon and hope answers appear. She needs to cross the sea again, and she needs to do it before someone catches up. Just like that, Seo-ah slips away as quietly as a mouse. A bank employee promises to get her somewhere safe and sound, but the news has already reached dangerous ears. In Felipe's mansion, the bank president sweats as he realizes an arrogant man like Oscar von Reinhard would never ignore such a report. Felipe insists he knows the situation for a fact. A woman came in with the safe key Oscar has been seeking. Oscar sits behind candlelight, smoke curling between his fingers, and asks what happened inside Felipe Bank. Felipe smiles too broadly and says this is more like it, but Oscar's calm stare turns the room colder. Felipe assumes Oscar will not get involved in trivial bank confusion, but Oscar rises with a quiet laugh that makes Felipe's confidence crack. Standing over him, Oscar asks one more time what happened inside Felipe Bank. Felipe admits that a woman came in with the safe key and identification papers, but the papers could not be translated. The detail changes everything. Oscar's smile sharpens because untranslated documents mean the woman is not local, and a key that old does not appear by accident. Felipe suddenly understands that the safe can now be opened, and his face drains as Oscar's blue eyes narrow. Oscar says that if Felipe could have handled the safe alone, he would have done it already. The condition was always simple. The safe cannot be opened without the key. Felipe tries to protest that Oscar is underestimating a foreign woman, but Oscar's foot drives him down and breaks the argument apart. After 25 years, the key is worth more than a safeguard, a careless bank president, or any royal council. Oscar reminds Felipe that he placed a worthless fool like him on the council and even made him president of the bank, only to have him feed Oscar news of his own movements back to the King of Luxon. Oscar's voice lowers as he says Felipe should have at least known how to make trouble properly. Then his patience ends. Felipe collapses to the floor, breathless, while Oscar tells him that now that the key has turned him completely useless, he should stay down and keep his mouth shut. The room breaks into panic as guests and attendants cry out from behind the door. Oscar walks out with Simon at his side, asking about the key. Simon answers that they are tracking it right now. Oscar's gaze sharpens into a thin smile. The owner of the key has appeared when everyone is desperate to find it. Oscar calls the situation a joke and asks where she is now. Elsewhere, Seo-ah looks up at an glowing softly in the snow-dusted street. A local woman greets her warmly, asking whether she needs a room, and Seo-ah answers that she only needs one for the night. The woman laughs and says a fine room has just been vacated, then leads her inside. Seo-ah follows with her shoulders tight, unaware that the search has already tightened behind her. The hallway darkens around her, and the helpers near her turn into silhouettes. She has found shelter for one night, but the wolf is already moving. Snow falls over Luxon's streets as Oscar von Reinhard rides in a carriage, his black suit neat and his blue eyes half-lidded with old hatred. A long time ago, he allowed a worthless traitor to escape across the continent. He caught the man once, but then received a report that the traitor had slipped away. The ship carrying him supposedly sank, so Oscar assumed the man had fallen with it. But assumptions are not proof, and Oscar's jaw tightens as he remembers why clear evidence mattered. That traitor brought downfall to his family, caused the loss of his father, and is now tied to the owner of the safe. The traitor's codename is Peter, once an elite agent of the Reinhard family, and Oscar knows better than anyone how cruel and persistent former comrades can be. If documents were exchanged with the previous king of Luxon, then a copy of those documents and the transaction money must have been hidden in that safe. After his family falls apart and his father's passing leaves him to rebuild alone, the money becomes meaningless. What matters is the proof. The safe's value fades, but the truth behind it grows sharper. The attempts after Luxon's new king took power may reveal secret contact between Felipe Bank and the throne. Oscar decides he must confirm the rumor himself. If the bait is not enough to bring the traitor out, he needs another way to expose what was hidden. In old memories, a younger Oscar watches adults whisper around him after his father's passing, his round eyes blank with shock. The woman called the Marchioness leaves as if she has been waiting for her husband to fall, carrying a suitcase and abandoning her clueless child to inherit a fractured family. Oscar is only 6 years old, his small hand reaching after her, and the coldness of that moment never leaves him. Because that woman leaves as if she has been waiting for something, Oscar keeps his eyes fixed on the safe for years. A servant announces they will arrive at the destination in 10 minutes, and Oscar answers calmly from inside the carriage. He has finally found news from a source that has been drying up, and it concerns an unknown woman. His gaze turns toward the window, thoughtful and dangerous. If the woman with the key is now alive in Luxon, then the impossible question becomes simple. Is she the living key he has been hunting? In the rented room, Seo-ah hears water dripping in a pale bathroom and slowly dries herself, her ash-brown hair falling over bare shoulders as steam clings to the air. She ties her red ribbon back into her braid, gathers the white dress around her chest, and wraps a robe over herself with careful, nervous hands. The room is bright, clean, and too unfamiliar to feel safe. Seo-ah checks the curtains and tells herself they are secured, but her eyes keep sliding toward the windows. Every soft sound makes her shoulders tense. Seo-ah locks the door, checks her luggage again and again, and finally lies on the bed with the pouch held against her chest. She tells herself she is safe and that everything looks okay, yet her body stays restless. When she looks back on the day, it feels like walking on thin ice. The coat she never removed, even under the hot sun, the single meal she barely managed to eat, the foreign stares, the key in her hand. All of it feels like a fragile paradise and a warning. Curled on the bed, she whispers to her teacher, asking if she is doing well. Night settles over the room, and Seo-ah hopes her worries will turn peaceful, even for a short while, because she has earned rest. But outside her door, darker voices gather. Men talk about using slumber-inducing dust for the first time, asking how to control the amount and whether to leave it alone once the coachman has been paid. They decide the sooner they secure the girl, the better. One man grins that exotic women are not exactly common, and another says she is delicate and pretty. Their words turn the inn's quiet darkness into something foul. Seo-ah wakes under a strange scent, her eyelashes trembling as dizziness swallows the room. She thinks the smell is ominous, and her consciousness slips even as fear pulls her awake. Her hand drags across the floor as she tries to crawl away, whispering that she has to get out quickly, but her limbs go weak. The men step in over her, smiling down as if she is a prize. One says the room should be aired because the smell is practically on the tongue, while another calls her a catch. Seo-ah's eyes flare open in terror when they say this is the perfect moment to move forward. The attack turns chaotic as Seo-ah bites down and fights with the last strength in her body. A man curses that she should be almost lost to the substance by now, but she keeps thrashing, refusing to let the haze take her completely. Another shouts that she is vicious and tells her to stay still, trying to force her down while pretending to soothe her. Seo-ah's breath scrapes in her throat, and she thinks of her teacher and grandfather, begging herself to stay awake. Then a heavy impact splits the room. One assailant is cast back, and the others spin around in shock. Blue light fills the doorway as Oscar Reinhard steps into the room, tall and shadowed in his suit, his blue eyes glowing through the haze. The men stammer, asking whether the customer has entered the wrong room, but Seo-ah recognizes the danger before they do. The wolf has come. Oscar looks from the fallen men to Seo-ah lying dazed on the floor, then vows that the man responsible will be eliminated. His gaze settles on her with terrifying focus. The blue-eyed wolf stands between her and the predators, but rescue from him may be only another kind of trap. In the dim blue-in room, one assailant insists Oscar has the wrong room, but Oscar answers with cold logic. The one who enters the wrong room should leave, not the one already inside. The man barely has time to smirk before Oscar moves. His strike cuts through the dark with chilling precision, hitting the thug hard enough to send a harsh shadow against the wall. Seo-ah lies dazed on the floor behind him, her white dress loose and her eyes unfocused, while the other men freeze. None of them understand his words, but they understand the overwhelming power perfectly. The assailants panic, shouting and asking who these men are, while Seo-ah blinks weakly from the floor. Oscar stands completely unfazed in the center of the room, black coat settling around him as if the chaos has nothing to do with him. One man is shoved aside, another staggers, and Simon kneels near Seo-ah to check her condition. Someone says the woman has faded into slumber, and Oscar orders them to move her aside for now. Then his men bring in the shadowy madam, a trembling older woman in a shawl, her sandals stepping through the dark marks on the floor. The madam shakes so hard her shoulders curl inward, but Simon tells her to look up. When she raises her eyes and sees Oscar standing among the fallen men, her face collapses in terror. Oscar smiles thinly and asks, "So you're here?" She stammers that she assumed the men were with him and that she was about to handle them herself. When she tries to move away, his men block her, and she drops into pleading. Oscar asks whether there were any guests staying that night, and whether the woman traded for 5,000 never existed either. The owner instantly understands that lying will not save her. Oscar asks exactly what she gave Seo-ah, and the madam sweats as she explains it is not a potent elixir. The substance only makes it difficult for the body to move while heightening the senses. Oscar's blue eyes sharpen over his cigar, and the owner's small smile vanishes. He asks whether that was enough for her to pull such a worthless stunt, then reminds her that if she could not even handle the aftermath properly, she should have known her place from the beginning. The woman bows her head, whispering that she is sorry, but fear has already stripped the apology hollow. Oscar asks whether the substance will wear off on its own by tomorrow morning, and the owner confirms it. He tells her not to wander away and to stay where she is, because Seo-ah will be fine once she wakes. Then his words turn colder, if she manages to wake. The owner flinches, and Seo-ah sits helplessly on the floor, still wrapped in the white cloth, her head drooping to one side. Oscar has not rescued her out of kindness. He is preserving the key, and everyone in the room understands that distinction. In the same dark room, Oscar's men report that they have secured the key, the certificate, and Seo-ah's identification papers. Once the duplicate key and certificate arrive, they are to exchange them for the originals. Oscar also orders a doctor summoned in advance, and if Seo-ah remains unconscious past tomorrow morning, the madam is to be brought back. Simon answers, "Yes, sir," but his gaze drops to Seo-ah's sleeping face as Oscar briefly rests a hand near her shoulder. The room is quiet, yet the way she lies there makes leaving feel wrong. Simon steps toward the door, then pauses with an uneasy thought. It does not sit right to leave Seo-ah in this state among a group of men. Oscar notices the hesitation and asks for her name. Simon assumes he means the woman's name, and Oscar confirms it sharply. The identification papers cannot be translated, so Felipe Bank has placed the matter on hold. Oscar orders Simon to bring a translated copy within the week and keep an eye on the bank. When he asks about Felipe's movements, Simon promises to confirm and report back. Oscar keeps the key close, but his eyes return to Seo-ah. Oscar stands over Seo-ah in the pale morning blue room, thinking he had assumed the key bearer would be someone far more formidable. Instead, the person carrying it is nothing more than a woman like this, delicate, slight, and clouded by the substance. Her eyes show no awareness, her skin is flushed, and her body trembles beneath the sheet as if she has been drawn through a blur. The absurdity of it is almost laughable. The world's most dangerous search has led him not to a powerful conspirator, but to a fragile stranger who can barely breathe clearly. The mysterious substance twists Seo-ah's body into feverish discomfort, and Oscar watches with a frown as her breathing grows uneven. A drop or two has reduced her to a person who cannot control her own limbs, and he turns away, thinking there is no point staring at a woman who is not fully conscious. Then a small sound stops him. Seo-ah's body jerks under the blanket, her hand tightening, and a faint trace marks her mouth. Even unconscious, she is straining her jaw to resist the haze. The sight cuts through Oscar's cold detachment. Oscar steps back to the bed and pushes his hand down beside Seo-ah, blue eyes narrowing as he says no. Not while he is here. Seo-ah's face is flushed and wet with tears, her lashes trembling as she fights something she cannot even name. Oscar's palm steadies near her, not gentle enough to be comfort, and not cruel enough to be abandonment. For the first time, the living key is not just an object to secure. She is a person stubborn enough to risk her own well-being rather than surrender, and Oscar cannot look away. In the pale room, Seo-ah's trembling hand grips Oscar's robe with desperate force, her fingers twisting the cloth as the substance pulls at her body. Oscar leans over her, blue eyes narrowed, and clamps his hand around her jaw before she can harm herself again. Her cheeks are fever red, tears running down her face, but her eyes remain empty and unfocused. He murmurs that she looks as if she will crumble at any moment. Even so, her body keeps resisting on instinct. Oscar recognizes it clearly. Vigilance has been carved into her so deeply that it survives even when her mind does not. Oscar presses his thumb gently to stop her from straining her jaw, and the motion makes her breath hitch. She is limp, flushed, and barely conscious, yet still persistent enough to fight him. That will not do. If he handles this wrong, she could be lost before he ever opens the safe, and the thought sharpens his expression. He pulls her back against the bed and waits until her limbs finally stop moving. Only then does he lower his hand, watching her uneven breathing with a frown that looks almost irritated by concern. The room grows quiet after the struggle, sunlight washing across the bed while Oscar sits beside Seo-ah in his loose white robe. He checks her hand, studies her pulse and stillness, then looks down at her sleeping body with cold calculation. The substance has left her delicate and exposed, her white dress twisted around her, but he does not reach for her with desire. Instead, his mind turns practical. He thinks he understands why the madam wanted to keep her, then stops himself. Whatever that reason was, Seo-ah is not fully present, and staring any longer is pointless. Oscar turns away, deciding there is no reason to watch a woman who is not all there. But Simon enters after being called and asks whether Your Grace summoned him. Oscar asks if he has what was requested. Simon reports that the doctor should arrive soon and that personnel have been stationed at the bank. He also brings information about the woman. Oscar listens without looking away from the bed, his expression unreadable. The key, the safe, and the unconscious woman have become one problem. Simon's report names her nationality as Dang Suk, an East Asian continent near the Liuho Empire, ruled by a monarchy. Oscar considers the detail as sunlight spills over the room. The woman appears to be of mixed heritage, though there is no confirmation yet. Simon agrees. Oscar calls his name, and Simon answers at once. But Oscar's real question is heavier. How did the key get into that woman's hands? The room turns colder around that question. The answer cannot be simple, because the key should have disappeared with Peter years ago. Oscar remembers the old report. Peter had been caught, then supposedly vanished in a storm and sank into the sea. If that is true, then is Peter still buried somewhere beneath the water? Was the key floating ownerless in the ocean until Seo-ah found it? Simon says Peter is presumed to have been buried along with the key, and there have been no further reports since then. Oscar's gaze sharpens at the report number from 3 years ago. The intelligence agent who wrote it was Teresa Wittgenstein, a figure considered unrivaled. If anyone knew more, it would be her. Oscar asks whether there has been any contact with Teresa since that report. Simon confirms that her last message said she would investigate the matter further. Oscar orders him to find out where she is right now. Contradictory questions pile up, and the more Oscar thinks, the hotter his head becomes. The grudge he believed he had buried stands in front of him again, breathing under white sheets. Seo-ah's face remains peaceful only because she cannot wake, but to Oscar she is no longer just a woman with a key. She is the living center of a wound that never closed. Oscar watches Seo-ah sleep and realizes this cannot be resolved with a simple written apology. The past is too deep, Peter's trail is too strange, and the key has crossed too many impossible distances to end with paperwork. Inside Seo-ah's nightmare, fire eats through the dark and voices cry out for water. Someone shouts to bring more, another cries for mother, and Seo-ah sits frozen in a dim room with dull golden eyes and a body too small to move. She hears cries, the crackle of burning wood, and the helpless plea for rescue echoing beyond the paper door. Then the room bursts open in orange light. A woman in white stands at the threshold like a ghost born from the flames, hair loose, eyes blazing, and orders Seo-ah to get up and come outside. Seo-ah crawls on shaking hands as the woman tells her to rise and face what has happened. The voice says the one who burned Yanshin to the ground and brought suffering into the household is Seo-ah's father. The words strike harder than the heat. Seo-ah's fingers press against the floorboards while embers drift around her, and the woman's face twists with furious grief. She asks whether Seo-ah knows what her father did. The accusation turns the burning house into a courtroom, and Seo-ah becomes the child forced to stand trial for a sin she cannot understand. The woman says Seo-ah's grandfather, the man who could not bring himself to cast her out, was the one who took her in despite everything. Then she reveals the cruelest truth. Seo-ah's father disturbed his final resting place and took his remnants. Seo-ah's face empties with horror, her mouth open in a soundless gasp as the flames behind her pulse like judgment. The woman says Seo-ah has already figured it out from her expression. She already knows the woman is not her real mother, and the man she called father all this time was actually her grandfather. Then the woman asks the question that breaks Seo-ah completely. Does she know what her father also did to that woman's daughter? Seo-ah stands small in the burning room, tears catching the firelight as the truth closes around her. She whispers that she is sorry, but the apology comes from a child with no power to change anything. The woman's command turns desperate and cruel. Find her father, find that wretch, and bring her grandfather back. Beneath a sky devoured by flame, Seo-ah runs through soot and ash until the cries of countless people cling to her ankles. Even if she sees despair at the edge of the flames, even if her mother's fading figure blots out everything before her eyes, Seo-ah cannot stop. The only thing left is the order to bring her grandfather home. In the present, muffled voices cut through her ringing ears. Someone pleads that she is finally coming to, while another asks why they are so insistent. Seo-ah's eyelids flutter as light burns through the haze. Her body feels heavy, her thoughts scattered, and the old nightmare leaves her gasping before she even knows where she is. Seo-ah wakes to a grave situation she cannot move away from. The madam begs for mercy nearby, and Seo-ah lies under white sheets, struggling to lift even a finger. The woman's welcoming voice from the inn echoes in her memory, exposing the trap. Darkness folds over Seo-ah's senses again, and she thinks it is too dark, too frightening, too much. She calls silently for someone to help her. Then a shadow with glowing blue eyes stands over her through the haze. A wolf. Her breath catches, and terror returns before understanding does. White light floods in as Seo-ah opens her eyes and sees men in black suits standing around the room. Simon tells the others to look because she is waking, while the madam bursts into relief and apologizes loudly, thanking the heavens. Seo-ah sits up, wrapped in sheets, her face pale and damp with sweat, asking herself where she is. Simon says they have no further need for the owner and orders her removed and the news given to his grace. The room begins to clear, but Seo-ah's head pounds so hard she can barely focus. Oscar's voice cuts through the haze, asking whether Seo-ah is coming to her senses. She lowers her head, then looks up at Simon as he offers a hand and asks whether she can walk. Her lips part in surprise, but before she can gather her thoughts, the decision has already been made for her. She is told to change her clothes and follow. Seo-ah trembles, cheeks still faintly flushed from the substance, and follows the men through the pale hallway like a candle in the wind. Holding the key makes life feel impossibly fragile. As Seo-ah walks under guard, she realizes she does not fear her life being extinguished on its own. If the beginning of her life was begotten by sin, then atonement must, in the end, mean a dark end. What frightens her is failing to bring her grandfather home and meeting defeat in vain, accomplishing nothing at all. Her feet move over the polished floor, but her head stays bowed, too heavy to lift. The men around her are silent, and every step feels like she is being carried toward a fate chosen by someone else. In the bright room ahead, Oscar stands with his back turned, tall and composed in a fitted vest, while Seo-ah stops behind him with her shoulders folded inward. Simon bows, and the air becomes still. Oscar tells Seo-ah not to just stand there and orders her to look at him. Her eyes slowly rise, exhausted and wary, until they meet his. He smiles faintly, blue eyes sharp enough to cut through the fog in her mind. Seo-ah remembers the warning from her teacher. The wolf has come, and now the blue-eyed wolf is standing directly in front of her. Across the map of the world, Oscar's thoughts stretch far beyond the room where Seo-ah waits. Dangsuk is not just a distant homeland. It's the only known country on the eastern continent with a link to the Liuho Empire, and its diplomatic distance makes every formal inquiry slow and exhausting. The key is no ordinary object either. It represents the right to claim what is inside safe number 5555, so verifying Seo-ah's nationality, her documents, and the key's chain of ownership could take years. Oscar's eyes narrow at the problem. He doesn't like waiting when the answer is already within reach. Oscar gives the solution in one cold word: marriage. Simon repeats it in shock, his blonde head lifting as if he has misheard, but Oscar sits back with his glass and explains the logic. If he marries Seo-ah, the rumors surrounding her can be controlled, her identity can be handled under his protection, and the long diplomatic process can be shortened. Documents, seals, and legal barriers spread across the page like a maze, but Oscar looks at them like pieces on a board. To him, marriage isn't romance. It's a shortcut, a shield, and a leash all at once. Oscar knows the key is finally in front of him, yet the rules around it still depend on Seo-ah's will. If he waits for every procedure to clear, years may pass before the safe opens, and he has no intention of sitting quietly while the truth stays locked away. His fingers rest over his chest as his expression turns thoughtful, almost amused. He can take his time deciding how to handle her. When Seo-ah appears in his mind, slight and trembling in her pink cardigan, Oscar judges that she looks decent enough. The calculation is already becoming personal. In the pale hall outside, Seo-ah stands small beneath the high windows, clutching herself as Oscar's men watch from a careful distance. The key glints near her chest, and her brown eyes lift with nervous gratitude. She thanks Oscar for saving her, then lowers her head so deeply her braid slips forward. Oscar doesn't soften. He asks whether she properly understands what happened to her, and the question makes her shoulders shrink. When he orders her to follow him, she hesitates only for a breath before stepping after him, red shoes tapping across the floor like a fragile countdown. The door opens into a bright room washed with clean daylight, and Seo-ah freezes at the sight of its elegant furniture and wide windows. She murmurs in surprise, unable to hide how foreign everything feels, then quickly insists nothing is wrong when Oscar asks. Her politeness is almost painfully careful. She says she didn't expect the room to be so beautiful, and her cheeks warm as if even that compliment is dangerous. Oscar offers her something to drink. She accepts with both hands, thanking him again, while he watches the tiny shake in her fingers and quietly notes how nervous she is. At the table, Seo-ah sits upright with the glass held close, speaking with such careful manners that it almost disarms the room. She thanks Oscar again, and he studies her face as if checking for hidden damage. When he asks whether her tongue is all right, she blinks in confusion, not understanding why he would mention it. The question carries the memory of her earlier panic, but she has no clear grip on what happened. Oscar's expression remains mild enough to be unsettling. Then he asks her name. Seo-ah's lips part, and after one small pause, she answers Seo-ah. Oscar repeats the name, slow and deliberate, and the sound of it makes Seo-ah stiffen. It is not a storm, not a blade, but something about his voice presses against her chest and makes the room feel narrower. Her thoughts flicker back to the warning she received, the name she was told to fear, and the blue-eyed wolf who would come looking for the key. Oscar introduces himself fully as Oscar von Reinhard, and Seo-ah's eyes widen. The pieces settle with terrible clarity. As expected, this is the man her teacher warned her about. The memory strikes her like cold water. The black-haired man, the blue eyes, the wolf who came looking for her. Oscar says he is glad she found him, but the gentleness in the line never reaches his smile. Seo-ah grips the glass tighter as he begins asking what she knows. He confirms that she came from a faraway place called Dangsuk and that she went to Felipe Bank to open a safe. Seo-ah answers softly that she did, her eyes unsteady. Oscar leans forward, calm and patient, and asks why. The question lands exactly where her fear is weakest. Seo-ah looks around the room as if the walls themselves might explain how Oscar knows so much. He presses her again. She went to Felipe Bank to open the safe, and now he wants the reason. She whispers that she did it for money. Oscar studies her with one blue eye half-shadowed, then asks why she thought the safe would give her what she needed. In his mind, the name Peter and the missing key are tangled together, but Seo-ah's answer is heartbreakingly ordinary. She is not chasing power. She is trying to survive, and survival has a price. Seo-ah clutches the ribbon and key near her chest, trying to explain herself without giving away more than she understands. Oscar repeats the word money, then suddenly lowers his head with a rough laugh, as if the answer is almost too simple to believe. A sharp smile cuts across his face. If this is only about money, then the conversation becomes much easier. He tells her that this makes things convenient, because he has no intention of letting her go anyway. Seo-ah's eyes widen across the table, and the bright room turns colder than any locked safe. In the bright room, Oscar watches Seo-ah read the contract with her head lowered and both hands tense around the paper. She has no trouble reading the continent's common language, and she speaks it fluently too, which makes her situation even stranger. A foreign woman in noble-looking clothes, alone, carrying money and a key valuable enough to cross oceans, shouldn't be sitting here like a lost child. Yet Seo-ah avoids his eyes and keeps her shoulders folded inward. Oscar studies that mismatch closely. Then she looks up and asks what he thinks of the contract. Seo-ah sits with the contract in her lap, lips parted as she tries to understand the choice in front of her. Oscar tells her that if she is unsure, he can have someone review it for her, but her expression already says the truth. She doesn't have many options. Her fingers tighten around the paper until it crinkles. She explains that no matter how she thinks about it, she cannot refuse. Oscar remains calm, almost too calm, and clarifies that the agreement is her own responsibility once she signs. When he says it is time for payment, Seo-ah's face drains with confusion. Oscar reaches for the papers before Seo-ah can fully gather herself, and the sharp motion makes her flinch. He tells her some parts can wait until after she has seen a doctor, then gives another practical order. She will take an attendant and remain under the arrangements prepared for her. Seo-ah's eyes widen at the idea that she can stay in such a place. The beautiful room around her feels less like a reward and more like a cage made of sunlight. Still, she nods, clutching the pen as if it might steady her shaking hands. When Seo-ah says she thinks she can write now, Oscar steps close behind her and takes control of the signing process with unsettling ease. His body leans over her shoulder, his voice dropping near her ear as he tells her to write her name first. Seo-ah stiffens, cheeks flushing, and the pen trembles between her fingers. He repeats her name, tasting the sound of it again, Seo-ah. The closeness turns the simple act of signing into another reminder that her freedom is already being narrowed. Her hand moves, but it no longer feels entirely like her own. Seo-ah glances up at Oscar from beneath her lashes, embarrassed and wary as he corrects the way her name should be written in this land. He suggests translating it properly, then places the pen back in her hand as if the matter is settled. She tries to answer politely, but her voice comes out soft and uncertain. Oscar finally steps away, taking his coat as the servants and attendants enter. The moment his shadow leaves her shoulder, Seo-ah breathes a little easier. Then Simon arrives at the door and announces himself, pulling her back into the rules of the house. Near the doorway, Oscar gives his next order with the same quiet authority. Seo-ah is to wash and be cared for. She stands in the room with both hands folded at her waist, looking smaller beside the tall windows. Her voice barely holds when she asks when he will return, but Oscar only looks back with unreadable blue eyes. He does not answer the way she wants him to. Instead, he leaves her with attendance and instructions, and the distance between them stretches down the hallway. Seo-ah remains behind, protected only because he has decided she is useful. So this is how Seo-ah enters Oscar's home, not as a guest, not as family, but under a binding contract. She stands beside the window and looks at her own hand, remembering the stroke of the pen and the weight of the agreement. For now, the terms may sound favorable because they give her shelter, food, treatment, and distance from the bank's trap. But every condition depends on Oscar's purpose. There is no law here that truly guarantees her will. Only his protection exists, and only as long as she remains useful. For now, it has to be enough. At the royal palace, the air changes from quiet tension to open outrage. A well-dressed noble shouts across the chamber, his face flushed and mouth twisted as he demands how anyone could forget a young lady caught in such a scandal. The insult spreads through the gilded room, bouncing from marble walls and polished doors. Another man, seated in rich formal robes, argues back with dramatic gestures, insisting he will defend his position even if it costs him his place. The court looks elegant from a distance, but up close it is all bruised pride, political fear, and men trying to avoid blame. Inside the same chamber, the older noble in ornate clothing grips his cane and spits out excuses as the argument tightens around Oscar's name. He insists there is no simple agreement to remember and questions the price being demanded, his glasses flashing as his expression curdles with panic. Across from him, another court figure smiles too sharply, reminding him that age must be affecting his memory. The words are polite enough to pass as court language, but the threat underneath is obvious. Everyone in the room understands that Seo-ah's custody has already become part of a larger political bill. The palace doors open, and Oscar von Reinhardt steps into the room with a composed bow and a smile that makes the argument die in place. His dark suit is immaculate, his blue eyes bright with controlled amusement, and the men who were shouting moments ago suddenly look far less certain. Oscar offers an apology for arriving before such an audience, but there is no real humility in the gesture. The royal figure greets him as Marquis, and Oscar lowers a hand to his chest with flawless courtesy. The wolf has entered the court, and everyone can feel their own throats tighten. Inside the royal chamber, Oscar bows with perfect court manners, but the room already feels tilted in his favor. He asks for permission to speak, and the older noble on the throne stares down with a rigid, offended face. Around them, polished marble and gold trim make the confrontation look ceremonial, yet the tension is anything but refined. Oscar's blue eyes gleam as he raises his head. The men before him may hold titles, but he has entered with proof, purpose, and no intention of being quiet. Oscar says he only wants to ask a question of the Grand Duke, and the insult makes the older noble snap. His face twists red with anger as he demands what kind of excuse this is, but the royal voice cuts through and calls Oscar by his title. Oscar stands calmly under every stare and asks who should pay for what happened to the woman. The answer is simple in his mind. The people who lured her, failed to protect her, and left her vulnerable. When the Grand Duke erupts, Oscar's smile only sharpens. Oscar pushes the matter straight into business, asking how the Grand Duke intends to handle compensation and whether Seo-ah is being treated as a bargaining chip. His tone stays polite, but the words strike like a blade hidden under silk. Dark memory flashes behind his expression. The traitor, the old loss, and everything tied to his father's ruin. He knows exactly what it means to let powerful men twist responsibility into performance. The Grand Duke sputters, but Oscar's posture never changes. He has already decided the price will not be paid in empty outrage. The Grand Duke collapses forward in fury, pounding the floor as attendants rush toward him, while the royal chamber breaks into alarm. Oscar remains upright on the red carpet, not even flinching as the old man's rage turns into humiliation. Then he delivers the real announcement. Seo-ah is staying with him. He requests that the lady be placed under his personal protection, and the statement freezes the room more effectively than shouting ever could. From the throne, the king orders him to stop there. Oscar lowers his eyes, but his calm shows he expected the interruption. Oscar answers the king with flawless restraint, saying he understands the concern and has only come to report the matter properly. Then he opens the case he brought with him, sliding out a sealed document that turns the conversation cold. The royal figure watches with narrowed eyes as Oscar explains that the paper is not a simple request. It is proof, and proof changes who is allowed to speak. The Grand Duke's anger falters as the document lands like a weight on the table. Oscar is no longer asking for permission. He is showing why refusal will cost them. The envelope contains evidence tied to corruption among the nobles responsible for the bank and its surrounding operations. Dark documents, stamps, and scratched-out records fill Oscar's mind as he lays the trap open. If the royal side wants to keep its secrets buried, then keeping Seo-ah with him is the cleaner choice. She has the key. The key is connected to the safe, and the safe may expose far more than one woman's misfortune. Oscar bows again, elegant and deadly. The court sees manners, but underneath them is coercion wearing gloves. Oscar steps down from the royal confrontation with a faint smile, asking who could possibly be afraid of him now. The question is aimed at the throne as much as the room. Outside the palace, daylight floods the white stone grounds, and Simon waits with his usual composed posture. When he asks how the meeting went, Oscar answers that it went just as expected. The royal palace of Luxon rises behind them, beautiful and rotten at the same time. Oscar adjusts his glove, his expression unreadable, because the public battle is only one layer of the game. As they walk across the palace grounds, Simon notes the danger of provoking the Grand Duke so openly. Oscar does not look worried. He knows the old men will rage, but rage is not the same as action. What bothers him more is Seo-ah's answer from earlier, the way she spoke about money with no clear understanding of the danger behind the key. Simon listens with a slight frown as Oscar connects her behavior to Peter's old trail. The woman may appear harmless, but the mystery around her keeps refusing to stay harmless. Oscar says it is not time to tell Seo-ah everything yet. Simon asks what will happen to her now, and Oscar treats the answer as obvious. She remains under his watch as a guest, a protected woman, and a living clue. The investigation into her identity will continue, but her records are incomplete and her papers still need proper translation. Somewhere in the estate, Seo-ah stands alone in soft light, unaware of how many men are now discussing her fate. Oscar's gaze hardens. Her silence may be ignorance, but ignorance can still hide danger. The question of Seo-ah's usefulness is not even worth pondering to Oscar. She hesitates, she avoids eye contact, and she answers like someone who has been cornered too many times. But time is limited, and the safe will not wait forever. Simon brings up Abel, and Oscar asks whether he is back. The answer leads them toward a new matter: a doctor, a specialist, or perhaps another man who can examine what Seo-ah is hiding from her own body. In a separate room, a blond man lounges with a lazy smile and asks whether there is a new subject. The next test is already waiting. The memory opens in darkness, where the former elite agents tied to Peter Reinhard are hunted through alleys and underground rooms like men already sentenced by their own betrayal. These are not ordinary criminals to Oscar. They were people raised on loyalty, family pride, and coded obedience, yet one by one they collapse beneath the Reinhard wolves. Simon moves through the shadows with cold precision, blonde hair catching brief flashes of light while enemies fall and do not rise. The whole scene smells of wet stone, fear, and the kind of discipline that leaves no room for pleading. In the blackened hideout, Oscar's men drag prisoners into the center while others lie broken across the floor. Simon stands among them with his weapon lowered, his face unreadable, and asks what has been extracted from the captives. The answer is thin, almost useless. The men who betrayed the family still cling to rehearsed excuses even while their bodies shake from terror. One captive kneels with his hands bound behind him, head lowered so far his hair hides his eyes. Oscar watches from the dark with blue eyes that do not blink. A battered man tries to speak, voice breaking as he insists he knows what Oscar wants to hear. He pleads that he was only following someone else, only trying to survive, only doing what he had to do. The words spill out messy and desperate, and every excuse makes Oscar's expression colder. Seo-ah is not in this memory, but the same pattern echoes around her case. People make choices, then wrap them in fear when consequences arrive. Oscar listens just long enough to confirm there is nothing useful inside the pleading. Then he gives Simon the next quiet order. The man's cry of defeat vanishes into the underground dark, and the memory hardens into a lesson Oscar knows too well. Their movement is simple, their principles blind. They call it loyalty, but loyalty without judgment becomes another chain. Men like this had no true path to betray the family, and yet they did, then covered the act with sweet excuses once they were caught. To Oscar, Peter's people are all the same. Fear dressed as devotion, selfishness disguised as duty. He does not want their apologies. He wants the truth they keep failing to provide. The memory fades at the edge of the Reinhard estate, where Oscar returns beneath a cold sky and tall iron gates. The formal butler greets him as Your Grace, bowing with his hands folded, while Simon follows at Oscar's side. Oscar's mood remains distant, as if part of him is still underground with the old prisoners. The butler reports that the person he asked for has arrived, and the news draws Oscar's attention back to the present. Inside the estate, bright blonde Abel waits with a loose smile, looking far too relaxed for the strange case about to be placed before him. In the hall outside Seo-ah's room, Oscar stops as if confirming one final thought before approaching her. Seo-ah, now dressed in a pale yellow gown with a red ribbon at her throat, stands stiffly by the door with her braid falling over one shoulder. She is nervous enough to make her hands curl against her skirt. When she sees Oscar, her eyes lift in alarm, then drop again just as quickly. He studies the change in her clothes and tells her she looks more proper now. Seo-ah answers too politely, and the carefulness in her voice makes her fear obvious. Oscar tells Seo-ah not to tremble so much, but the command does little to settle her. She stands before him like someone waiting for punishment, shoulders tight and chin lowered. He explains that the estate is secure, safer than anywhere she could wander alone. But Seo-ah's guarded expression says safety and captivity feel too similar right now. When he mentions her parents and her situation, her face tightens with pain. She still does not know how much he understands or how much he has guessed. Every answer she gives sounds respectful, but every pause reveals panic. As they walk through the estate, Seo-ah follows a few steps behind Oscar, her shoes clicking softly across the polished floor. She keeps trying not to stare, yet the corridors, doors, and cold luxury press down on her from every side. Oscar notices the way her gaze slips away from him and tells her she can ask questions if she has them. Seo-ah hesitates, then gathers the courage to ask whether she will be allowed to go outside. The question is small, but the hope inside it is not. Oscar's smile thins, because freedom is exactly what he is not ready to give her. Oscar opens the door to Abel's room and announces that there is no need to wait any longer. Abel looks up from inside with tousled blonde hair, an open shirt, and a grin that is more curious than polite. He calls Oscar Marquis and immediately teases him about the woman brought in like some new subject. Seo-ah freezes behind Oscar, her brown eyes widening as she realizes she is being discussed in front of a stranger. Oscar corrects Abel without raising his voice, but Abel's amusement only grows. The room feels less like a clinic and more like an examination table made of conversation. Abel leans back with a lazy smile, asking whether Seo-ah is the unusual woman Oscar mentioned, while Oscar's blue eyes remain fixed and unsmiling. The specialist's curiosity sharpens the air around them. Seo-ah stands quietly in her new dress, hands folded over her skirt, not understanding the full danger of being studied by men who know far more than they say. Oscar refuses to treat this like a joke, but Abel's grin suggests he already understands the value of the case. The doctor has been called, the door is closed, and Seo-ah's body is about to become part of the investigation. In the estate hall, a dark travel trunk waits like a warning that Seo-ah is being moved again. Servants line the corridor, and Seo-ah stands wrapped in a black cloak, her braid resting over one shoulder as she looks toward Oscar and Simon. She has barely adjusted to one set of rules before another begins. Oscar, dressed neatly in black and white, checks the time with calm efficiency and asks where the person he called is. Then a bright blonde man steps into the scene with flowers and a soft smile, greeting Seo-ah as if this strange morning is perfectly normal. Seo-ah blinks at Abel's cheerful greeting, her brown eyes round with surprise. He introduces himself with easy confidence, all loose blonde hair, white shirt, and golden flowers, while the men around him remain formally still. Seo-ah answers with a hesitant hello, unsure whether to bow, speak, or simply disappear into her cloak. Oscar cuts through the softness and says they should leave, but Abel still manages to hand Seo-ah a little token with a friendly smile. She accepts it with both hands and thanks him. His warmth is disarming, which makes the whole situation feel even stranger. Abel's name carries more weight than his lazy smile suggests. Behind his relaxed posture lies a famous medical career, research tied to Nobel commissions, and a reputation built on treatments that made powerful families seek him out. Before stepping away from formal circles, he had enough skill and influence to become someone Oscar would summon for a case this sensitive. The old records and portraits surrounding his past make him look almost like a bright figure in a dusty archive. Yet in the carriage, Seo-ah only sees a blonde man lounging comfortably, as if all of this is a distant story that does not touch him. Inside the carriage, Abel keeps trying to draw a reaction out of Oscar, asking whether he is not curious or whether he should ask more plainly. Oscar's face stays turned away, cold and uninterested. What matters is not Abel's teasing, but whether he followed the instructions Oscar gave him. Abel answers with a smile that he did exactly as asked. The answer opens another glimpse into his complicated standing. Noble connections, royal medicine, and a life tangled with households that tried to use his talent. Abel may joke like a carefree man, but his past is full of chains polished to look like honor. That past includes a marriage arrangement and family pressure wrapped in roses, ceremony, and public smiles. Abel once stands amid bright flowers with a woman in luxurious dress, his blonde head bowed, as if romance and duty are being pressed together around his throat. To the outside world, it looks beautiful. Underneath, it is another noble transaction, another life being arranged by people who speak in titles and expectations. Abel's smile in the present makes more sense against that memory. It is not innocence. It is the mask of someone who learned to laugh while being cornered. Oscar says he does not care to know about Abel's romantic entanglements, and Seo-ah startles quietly at the bluntness. The journey continues to the station, where smoke rises over the tracks and the train waits beneath a pale sky. Seo-ah climbs aboard with the others, her cloak gathered close, while Abel lounges as if even travel is entertainment. Oscar's expression remains heavy, his thoughts elsewhere. The train begins moving, carrying them away from the estate and into another stretch of uncertainty. Seo-ah watches the window, her hands folded tightly, sensing that this trip is not simply for treatment. During the ride, Seo-ah tries to address Oscar, but the conversation keeps slipping away from her control. The carriage around them feels too narrow, full of polished wood, guarded silence, and men who know more than they reveal. Then the train jolts, slowing with a metallic cry that makes Seo-ah's body stiffen. Her eyes widen as the sound cuts through the cabin. Oscar and the others react quickly, but not with surprise. They have expected trouble somewhere along the route. Seo-ah does not know the reason, only the sensation. Danger has stepped onto the same path. The train stops, and the party moves through the corridor under tense silence. Oscar's men position themselves around Seo-ah, while Abel watches with a smile that has lost some of its laziness. Someone tells the lady to come carefully, and Seo-ah obeys, her boots touching the steps with uncertain care. Outside, the station air feels cold and open, but the guarded formation around her makes it feel like a closed room. Abel complains lightly about what has happened, then covers his face as if the inconvenience pains him. Seo-ah looks between them, still trying to understand what threat they are moving around. In the quiet cabin afterward, Seo-ah sits alone by the red seat and clutches her small token while the scenery beyond the window blurs into gray. Something about the halted train and the men moving outside pulls her back toward old fear. The corridor grows dark in her mind, and her eyes sharpen as if listening for danger no one has named yet. Oscar, standing nearby, notices that look. It is not simple nervousness. It is the expression of someone whose body has learned to prepare before the mind can explain why. Seo-ah is afraid, but her fear is also information. Right then, Oscar understands that Seo-ah's senses belong to someone who has survived by feeling danger before it arrives. She startles at the smallest shift, her pink eyes wide in the dim light. While outside the train, his men move into the forest to investigate. Oscar stands beneath the trees with a faint, dangerous smile, his black and white uniform cutting through the mist. He does not yet tell Seo-ah everything. For now, it is enough to confirm that her instincts are real. If someone is coming, Oscar intends to find them first. In the forest beyond the halted train, Oscar stands over the captured assailants beneath a darkness broken by drifting flecks of light. His shirt is marked from the fight, but his expression stays almost bored as he asks whether they really thought their pursuit was hidden. The men around him bow their heads, battered and terrified, while the woods close in like a cage. One attacker confirms the answer in a trembling voice. Oscar's blue eyes lower with cold certainty. Whoever sent them was careless, and carelessness around the Wolf of Luxon has a price. Oscar strikes before the men can steady themselves, the blow dropping one attacker hard against the ground. He asks how much money the old man gave them, and the silence tells him more than any confession. His men stand behind him in a tight formation, ready to finish the rest, while Oscar dusts off the matter like an annoyance. A hunter who hides too close to the ground can still be found by scent, sound, and timing. The ambush was meant to corner him, but instead it proves something useful. The enemy is desperate enough to move openly. In the black space behind the attack, the trail of the royal faction becomes clearer. For 5 days, hidden hands have moved through shadows, carrying messages, hiring men, and trying to find the right moment to strike. They think small tricks can become strategy if they are buried deep enough, but Oscar's people are used to filth and backdoors. Those hands have already stepped too far into the mud. There will be no clean retreat for them now. The men who tried to touch Seo-ah's path have not just failed, they have announced who fears the key. Back on the train and carriage route, daylight returns, but Seo-ah cannot relax. She sits near the window in her black cloak, looking out at the city as if the answer might be written on the streets. Abel tries to keep the atmosphere light, telling her there is no need to look so worried, but her eyes keep following the movement outside. The capital feels too bright after the forest darkness. Seo-ah asks what is happening beyond the glass, and the question hangs between them. No one gives her the full truth. At the table inside their temporary stop, Seo-ah quietly wonders whether the disturbance is connected to the newspapers, the palace, or the royal family. Abel, seated across from her with his loose blonde hair and amused eyes, answers lightly, but his calm does not erase the tension. Seo-ah's gaze turns toward the city again, where the kingdom's buildings rise under a pale sky. Somewhere beyond those rooftops, men are fighting over the meaning of her key. She is beginning to understand that her body may be sheltered, but her name is already traveling through places she has never seen. Inside the royal palace, the long-haired king receives his report, and the chamber fills with anger before the servant even finishes speaking. A purple-haired official bows low and addresses him as Your Majesty, but humility does not save him from blame. The king stands with his back to the window, metals glittering against his formal blue coat, and demands why the matter has been handled so poorly. His hand slams against the desk, sending papers and fruit trembling. To him, Oscar's interference is not merely inconvenient. It is an insult inside his own house. The official tries to explain that he did his best, but the king's fury only deepens. The room tightens around them as he asks whether everyone has forgotten what Oscar is capable of. A noble with a sharp profile watches from the side, his mouth set in grim calculation, while the king rages about missed chances and useless subordinates. Every word reveals the same fear. Oscar has seized the woman, the key, and the legal advantage before they could recover control. The royal side is not planning from strength anymore. It is scrambling from embarrassment. The report grows worse as the palace considers the men who have been caught and the evidence that may now be in Oscar's hands. Prison bars, wounded agents, and whispered orders fill the king's thoughts like stains spreading across white fabric. If the attackers are traced back to him, the incident will become another chain for Oscar to pull. The king tries to reason through the damage, but the more his advisors speak, the clearer the trap becomes. The key, the safe, the bank, and the failed ambush are no longer separate problems. They are converging on the throne. The king's thoughts sink into an older mistake, underestimating Oscar von Reinhard. He once believed the young Marquis could be bent by pressure, grief, and political convenience, but that assumption has become a costly miscalculation. Oscar does not break the way other nobles do. He gathers every slight, every document, every hidden hand, and waits until the debt can be collected with interest. In the palace, advisors trade careful words about witnesses, records, and royal responsibility. Beneath the court language, one truth sits plain: they have lost the initiative. The king explodes at last, calling the man before him useless as his hand sweeps across the table and sends an apple tumbling from a silver dish. The officials flinch, faces pale, while the royal chamber glitters around them like a gilded cage. Outside, Seo-ah continues moving under Oscar's protection, still unsure whether the fear in her chest belongs to memory, instinct, or the danger now surrounding her. Wind stirs her cloak as she looks toward the distant city. The dream, the key, and the people chasing her are beginning to feel connected, even if she cannot yet name how. And that's where we'll leave them for now. If this one hit you right, you already know the move. Tap subscribe. The next obsession drops twice a week, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. I pulled 2 more recaps just for you. They're on your screen right now. Pick your poison. This was Manhwa Dragon. Stay obsessed. I'll see you in the next one.